and Jeff Bezos.
Thank you, Jeff, for being here in Torino. Last time was 2017.
Yeah.
And a lot has happened since.
Yeah, for sure.
So what you're seeing today, we really started in 2016, and it was very much driven by trying to see how we could, in Italy and in Turin, be more entrepreneurial and be more attuned with technologies of today and of tomorrow. And since then, if you look over the last decade in Europe, you've had investments going from 45 billion into the tech ecosystem to 425. If you look at the programs which we've been involved, like Vento, who came out from that 2016 period, we've now invested in many companies with Italian founders in Italy and outside, of which one B has just been acquired by Amazon, so thank you.
Thank you.
And the event that was started in 2018, 100 people, now we have 15,000, and we could have had more, but we're constrained by capacity. And this has very much been driven by the alla and all the team that have made it possible to be here today. All of this to say that there's a huge amount of optimism. The president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, was very strong about why it's important to be optimistic. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I get all weak kneed around entrepreneurs. I just love entrepreneurs, and I always have. I like missionary entrepreneurs, people who are, they're doing it because there's something about the mission that they just can't not do it. They're so passionate about it. And I'm guessing that this room is full of such people. And I think you should be very optimistic. In fact, entrepreneurs need to be optimistic almost to the point of delusion. You need to be right there. There's this, you maybe remember the great John F. Kennedy speech about going to the moon and other things. He says, we do these things not because they're easy, but because they are hard. But I've always thought that for entrepreneurs, it should be a little different. We do these things not because they're easy, but because we thought they were going to be easy. So that's a useful attitude for entrepreneurs. And Europe, you hear these things about Europe that it's not enough dynamism in Europe, there's too many regulations in Europe. Let me assure you, there are plenty of regulations everywhere, and what you need is that can-do attitude, that entrepreneurial attitude. That's what drives people to success, and Europe has all of the ingredients they need to be a dynamic, entrepreneurial, just a huge success, and you can tell it just from the people in this room.
Do you agree?
And of course, startup companies, small companies, thrive in moments of great and rapid change. Stability favors incumbents, and rapid change favors small, dynamic, nimble startup companies. And so the world is so rapidly changing right now. There's never been a better moment to be an entrepreneur. There has never been a better moment to be a startup company.
And if you think about entrepreneurs and startup companies. Amazon now is a very large company. We are involved with very large companies, and there's this idea that if you want to be an entrepreneur, you should drop out from college, start your own company. Whilst if I look at my own experience, luckily I did not drop out from college and start my own company when I was studying engineering here, and I ended up working for a very large company back then, which was General Electric, where I did learn how to work, where I had colleagues from many different places who had a lot to teach me. And I was wondering if you had a different path than dropping out from college and starting your own company. If there are multiple paths, and if working for big companies is also not exciting, and within a large company, you could still be entrepreneurial.
So there's a lot packed in there, and I'll tell you my view on this is that it is possible to be 18, 19, 20 years old, drop out of college, and be a great entrepreneur. And the world we have famous examples of that working, Bill Gates, Mark Zuckerberg, etc. But these people are the exception. I always advise to young people, go work at a best practices company somewhere where you can learn a lot of basic fundamental things. How to hire really well, how to interview, etc. There's a lot of stuff you would learn in a great company that will help you. And then there's still lots of time to start a company after you have absorbed. It increases your odds, in my opinion. I started Amazon when I was 30, not when I was 20. And I think that extra 10 years of experience actually improved the odds that Amazon would succeed. So that would always be my
And you finished
advice. I finished college, and I enjoyed college, and I think it's been helpful to me. And then I went on and I worked for a really great company called D.E. Shaw & Co., where I learned a tremendous amount there.
And working.
And by the way, as you mentioned, when you're inside a big company, you can be entrepreneurial. Big companies need mavericks. They need people to lift them up and make them see new things. And it's up to the leadership of big companies, good companies, best practices companies, when they get larger, they defend their mavericks. They don't eject them. They figure out how to support them and keep them, driving change inside the company. Because really most big companies get comfortable, and the mavericks cause discomfort. And so it's easy to keep them away and kind of drive them out, but you'll lose so much that way. At Amazon and at Blue Origin, we're very careful to keep our mavericks.
And I think this is really important, Jeff, because what we're trying to do here is show the future, both from new companies who start, but companies also who transform and evolve.
Yeah.
And being clear that working for our companies, for Amazon, for Stellantis, for Blue Origin, for Ferrari, for CNH, is exciting.
Yeah.
And
gigantic opportunities inside those companies.
And you can also, on the back of that, and the back of that experience, start companies that you would have had more difficulty in imagining if you started from scratch. And I think that's important to share this experience with all of you. And among the experiences that also I felt was important and being more personal, one of the similitudes that Jeff and I have is we have had the fortune of having a very loving family, and among our loving family, we had very strong relationships with our grandparents. And particularly we had grandfathers who had a big influence in what we did. So I had a grandfather he was very young, 56 years old, and he spent a lot of time with us. And he really was able to do two things which have been very meaningful for me. On one side, always try and stimulate curiosity. And the way he would do that was always asking questions of what we think. And it's quite rare that children get asked what they think. And in any different situation, if we go to a museum or if we meet someone, or if he'd always be interested, and that stimulation of curiosity. And the second thing is responsibility. Since very young, he really would want us to make choices. And choices could be like, he liked to watch movies, had a very, very short attention span. So if the movie wasn't good, 5 minutes, it was gone. If you'd like go half the way to the movie, that was success. And so we always had to choose the movie he would see. And so going from those small responsibilities to bigger responsibilities, like taking care of something that he thought was important, or a guest that he had. And that trust in us and that sense of responsibility are things that stayed very much with me. And I know you also had incredible grandparents and an incredible grandfather. What stays as of today from him, from what he taught you?
Well, you're right, this is something we have in common. My mother had me when she was very young. She had just turned 17 years old. She was still in high school in Albuquerque, New Mexico. In fact, they tried to kick her out of high school for being pregnant, and my grandfather said, no, you can't kick her out, it's a public school, she gets to finish high school. So anyways, there she was, pregnant with me in high school and finishing in her whole senior year after I was born. And because she was so young, my grandparents took me every summer so that she could have, some other kind of life for a few months. Not only she was, when you were a very, very young mother, you grow up very fast. And so every summer, from the age of 3 or 4 until I was about 16, I went and spent with my grandparents on their ranch in South Texas. And my grandfather, at that point, so I only knew him as a rancher. He had done a bunch of things in his life, but at that point he was a rancher. And he did, and this is quite common, I think, in rural areas, that people do everything themselves. He did his own veterinary work, he repaired everything. He had this D6 Caterpillar bulldozer that he had bought for like $5,000 because it was completely broken down. And we spent an entire summer fixing it. And to get the transmission out of the thing, we had to build our own crane. And so he had an incredible resourcefulness to him. He believed he could solve any problem. And I sort of watched him, his veterinary work on the cattle. He would make his own needles. He would get a little piece of wire and heat it up with a blowtorch and pound it flat and then sharpen it and drill a little hole through it. Some of the cattle even survived.
And I remember a very meaningful lesson that he gave you when you were in the car with your grandmother who used to smoke.
Yes, that was a very formative moment for me, and I thought I was a very smart little kid. I was very confident, and I'm only at this point maybe 10 years old, and this was, this would have been 1974, and there were a lot of radio commercials on the car radio about how smoking cigarettes kills you. This was 10 years after the US Surgeon General's warning, and it was still like there was big campaigns to get people to stop smoking. And one of these radio commercials said, every puff on a cigarette takes 2 minutes off of your life. And my grandmother was a chain smoker. She smoked all day long, and so always when we were in the car, she would have the window down and she'd be smoking the whole time. And I hated this. I thought it smelled bad and I didn't like it. And I was listening to these radio commercials, and so I decided I would calculate how many years of her life she had taken off. If every puff is 2 minutes, and I did some estimating, and I stood up in the back of the car and I proudly announced that she had taken, I don't remember what the number was, let's say 7 years off of her life. And I thought in my 10-year-old brain that they were going to congratulate me for being so clever. And instead she burst into tears. And I was taken aback. My grandfather pulled the car over on the side of the road. And he had never said one harsh word to me, by the way. in our entire relationship. He never did say a harsh word to me, by the way. And so he pulled me around, he took me out of the car, he took me out to the back side of the car. She's still in the front seat, tears coming down her cheeks. And he said to me, I had no idea what he was going to say. And he said to me, Jeff, one day you'll understand that it's harder to be kind than it is to be clever. His view of the world was, every time I released an idea, I was creating a backlog, a queue, work in process. And because it was just stacking up, it was adding no value, and in fact, it was creating distraction. And so he said, look, you have to figure out when to release these new ideas at a rate that the organization can accept them. And this was, this sounds so obvious, but it was not obvious at the time to me. And this was a profound insight for me. And so I started prioritizing the ideas better, keeping lists of them, keeping them to myself until the organization was ready for the ideas. And then I also started figuring out, how can I build an organization that can be ready for more ideas? That's about having the right senior team and the right leadership and getting those people the executive bandwidth so that they could do more ideas per unit time. And so, and that is what we built. We built a company that's very good at inventing and doing more than one thing at a time. And you do want to build, as the company is bigger, you do want to be able to do more than one thing at a time. But that idea of releasing the work was very profound for me. And it made us operationally more effective while still being inventive.
And you think you're a better inventor on the back of that? So the actual inventions that...
Probably, because it also forces you, if you are releasing the ideas at their time, it forces you to prioritize them better. You end up sharpening the ideas better. And so yeah, it probably does. But you have to wander. Thank you.
Flying cars. The reality is my daughter Vita, who's here, was very disappointed when I showed her a flying car, which is a child of a helicopter and a drone, and it's not actually a car that then flies, but it will happen. And healthcare, which is a sector where we've been spending a lot of time and looking at machines that Philips do, where surgery is going to become more and more precise and more clever thanks to this combination. We are in Turin, which not only has its roots in cars and automotive, but also in aviation and space. Because from the engines that were applied to cars and multiple machines, trucks, agricultural equipment, they also went in planes and ultimately on rockets. And combustion will stay on rockets.
Yeah.
And we have a very strong base here in Turin, a lot of companies, a lot of excitement. You're spending a huge amount of time in Blue Origin.
Yeah.
Very few people know how hard you're working on it. And the truth is, you haven't really stepped down. On the contrary, you just went much faster forward. Can you tell us a little bit about how the world looks like 10, 50 years from now?
Well, so I am working very hard on Blue Origin. I'm working very hard on AI. I'm the least retired person in the world, and I will never retire because work is too much fun. It will never happen.
And Lauren is, you're for it.
She knows it makes me happy. And so look, Blue Origin, we're at the end of this month, or maybe the first week in November, we're going to launch our New Glenn vehicle, and we're sending NASA's Escapade satellite into orbit around Mars. So that's about to happen. We are building a lunar lander that is going to land on the moon here in just a few years, and also very exciting. It's hydrogen powered. We developed being 20 Kelvin, very, very cold, 20 degrees above absolute zero, 20 Kelvin electric powered, solar powered cryocoolers, so that we can keep liquid hydrogen liquid and have it be a storable propellant in space. This is very hard to do. We already have made amazing progress on it because hydrogen is the highest performing fuel for rocketry, for space travel, but it has this problem that it has to be kept so cold that historically it hasn't been able to be used on deep space missions because it just boils away. So we're solving that problem, making hydrogen a stowable fuel. We are doing R&D into how to build solar cells from lunar regolith on the surface of the moon. Because if you're going to go to the moon and stay on the moon, you need to be using the resources of the moon. You need to be harvesting the moon to make that cost effective.
So the moon will be a launch pad?
The moon is a gift from the universe. It's so close to Earth. It's only 3.5 days away. We can launch and get to the moon anytime. Unfortunately, to get to other planetary bodies, they have very rare launch windows. Mars, you can go to Mars once every 26 months or so. And so the moon is really a gift, and it has a very low gravitational field, only 1/6 of Earth's, which means it takes about 30 times less energy to lift a kilogram of mass off the moon than it does to lift it off the Earth. So we can use the moon as a rocket fuel depot to go to the rest of the solar system. One of the things that's going to happen in the next, it's hard to know exactly when, it's 10 plus years, but I bet it's not more than 20 years. We're going to start building these giant gigawatt data centers in space. So these giant training clusters, those will be better built in space because we have solar power there 24/7, and the solar power there there are no clouds and no rain, no weather. So you can build. We will be able to beat the cost of terrestrial data centers in space in the next couple of decades. And so space will end up being one of the places that keeps making Earth better. It already has happened with weather satellites, it's already happened with communication satellites. The next step is going to be data centers and then other kinds of manufacturing.
And will we be able to travel on Earth faster?
Yeah, I think so, eventually. This is very challenging, this kind of hypersonic travel on
Up
Earth.
and down.
The point-to-point ballistic travel. It doesn't break any laws of physics. It's difficult in some ways. Rockets tend to be very noisy, so people probably don't want them like in their downtown areas. So we'll have to figure out exactly how that works. But there may be other ways of doing hypersonic travel too. So I do think that will happen.
And living in space, when do you think we'll be living in space?
Well, I believe we'll have in the next kind of couple of decades, I believe there will be millions of people living in space. That's how fast this is going to accelerate. It's interesting too because they'll mostly be living there because they want to. Our robotic technology is getting so good. We don't need people to live in space. Anything that we need done, if you need to do some work on the surface of the moon or anywhere else, we will be able to send robots to do that work, and that will be much more cost effective than sending humans.
And if you were to advise a movie or a book of sci-fi that's, in your view, more truth to what we expect, what would that be? And I'm asking because I know you love sci-fi. And
I love sci-fi.
And myself of seeing how you always read and see these movies and it never happens.
I've read so much science fiction, just starting in that little town in South Texas where I spent my summers with my grandfather. Someone had donated his science fiction collection to the local library, which is this town of only 3,000 people. And over the course of a few summers, I read my way through that. All the classics, Asimov and Heinlein and so on. Something that I would recommend is the Culture series, only because it has such an interesting utopian take on the intersection of humanity and artificial intelligence. And I think there's so much talk about that right now. Not that this is the way it's going to be or anything, but it's just a very interesting way to think about these super intelligences. We didn't have time to talk about that, but I find so many people nervous or anxious or even a little discouraged or depressed by thinking about these coming, right now computers can easily beat us at chess. Once they can beat us at anything, do we have meaning in our lives? I think the answer to that is 100% yes. We will still have meaning in our lives.
Grazie.